as a little girl or a little boy saying, "Tell me a story." We humans, just our minds grab onto story. That's kind of the heart of what I'm going to be talking about with my very special guest in this episode. I'm Dr. Carol. Thank you for joining me. Jerry Jenkins is joining me. You may know Jerry Jenkins as author of the Left Behind series that was the first title was released, I believe, over 30 years ago. He has written over 200 books, including multiple New York Times bestsellers. And can you imagine 200 published books? Well, his latest, The Chosen, and I Will Give You Rest, Volume 3 of the Chosen novel series. Now, some of you not old-timers may be more familiar with The Chosen, the television series, the app, just all the video products there. Well, Dallas Jenkins, who co-wrote, produces, and so on, The Chosen, is Jerry Jenkins' son. We talk about that in this fascinating conversation with Jerry Jenkins. We talk about his engagement with the whole Chosen project, what story is all about. We talk about writing and how he is helping other writers, and then some of his wisdom about family. You'll particularly want to stay tuned near the end as we talk about that, some very personal reflections. I really enjoyed this. So here is my conversation with Jerry Jenkins. Well, Jerry Jenkins, how special to have you on our program. Thank you for taking this time to join us. Wonderful, wonderful stuff we're going to talk about.
Well, thank you, Carol. Great to be with you.
You have been writing for decades, and the most recent one, which I think is just awesome, the Volume 3 of The Chosen, I Will Give You Rest. That's perhaps something that some of our viewers or listeners might be familiar with. Just give us kind of an update of the writing part of The Chosen and maybe how that coordinates with what many have seen in the videos and the app, whatever.
Right. Yeah, this is a common question because a lot of people say, why do you need a novel if you've got the TV series? And as you know, my son Dallas created the TV series, and I helped him get started in his career years ago. But this is all his. This is his own deal. And so I feel like I'm sort of pressing my nose up against the glass, asking if I can play too.
Yeah.
And he has graciously allowed me to do that. So I write a novel to go along with each season.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is sort of a backward way of doing it. Most TV shows or movies are based on books. Obviously, this one is based on the Bible. But then as far as the novel, I wait until the series has been written. And I use that same sequence and of course, watch the episodes.
Yeah.
And then I write a novel to go along with it, which I want it to mirror what you see on the screen when those scenes come up, because I don't like it when I read a book and then watch a movie or a TV show and it's different.
Yeah.
But in this case, I'm asked to do even more than that. And while when you get to the scenes that you've seen on the screen, they should look the same in the book, but I'm able to add even more plausible, believable imaginings, which is really what I think has made The Chosen work so well on television too. They take the scriptural stories and stay true to those, but they add characters, they add dialogue, they add events that would be plausible and would fit scripture, but would sort of bring the whole scene to life.
Yeah. I have heard from so many people, I know you have, I know Dallas has, that everything about The Chosen, the TV series, the novels, so many people feel like they're experiencing Jesus in a whole new way, at a level and in a dimension that they have never imagined before. And I think story has so much to do with that. The stories that we read in the Bible, often short, I might even say cryptic by some literary standards. So talk a little bit about maybe your thought process in starting from there and then building. You've done that in a lot of your career.
Yeah, the Bible is really interesting especially for a novelist or a filmmaker, because some of those stories, as you say, are only 2 or 3 verses long.
Right.
And you say, okay, we believe that happened. We know that's true. What might have led up to that? And you can play a lot of what if games. And that's what storytellers do.
Mhm.
I find that, story is really how we live.
Yeah.
We've been told stories, we've read stories, our parents have told us stories since we were children. And I even find when I'm listening to someone give a speech or a sermon, um, I want to be entertained, I want to be educated. I also never forget it if I'm emotionally moved. And usually that comes through a story. And
Yes.
even a pastor will be preaching, and I love expositional preaching. I think that's the way we should do it. But when he hesitates or pauses and says, I was talking to someone just the other day, everybody perks up. They want to hear this story, something they can relate to. And I think one of the geniuses of The Chosen, as far as the TV series, Dallas has seen all the TV shows and movies about Jesus for his whole life.
Yeah.
And he always felt like they did a good job with the God part of Jesus. He's ethereal, he's above it all, he kind of marches everywhere, he speaks in King James English. But we don't get the man part, the human part. And we know he was perfect. But if he was really truly the God man, our humanity should be identifiable there. We should be able to see him as a friend, as someone with a sense of humor, someone who has buddies and tells stories. And I think that's what makes it accessible. So that's been the fun of telling this story.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned the humanity of Jesus. One of the things I've been writing and talking about in recently, especially, is how Jesus needed people. He needed connect. He needed intimacy. He sought connection. I mean, he was in touch with his heavenly Father 24/7, but he needed people, and that's the humanness. Why do we think we as humans can get by with anything less if Jesus needed that? That's just one dimension that I've been thinking about recently, and story makes that so real.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is, as much as he needed that community, because they were human and not
Yes,
perfect, he got irritated with them sometimes too, and needed to get away from them at
yes,
times, and would talk about needing rest and needing time with his father, and those are the things that make him so accessible. When I used to read the Bible, I mean, I was raised in the church, so I know all the Bible stories and have been in the
yep.
Word every day for my whole life. I often saw the disciples as sort of all the same person.
Mm,
One or two of them had personalities, like Simon Peter, kind of had a temper, and then they were the sons of thunder. But the rest of them, I saw them, I guess, as stained glass window figures or
mm,
statues or old men with big gray beards. And really, the way that The Chosen has rendered them much more realistic,
yeah.
they were young men and they were blue collar guys. They were fishermen. There was a tax collector there, and they're real people and they have flaws. And so we can see ourselves in them instead of worshiping them as the apostles of the church. We say, hey, these guys were petty. They could be childish. They could get angry. And all of a sudden we say, that's me. I'm dealing with those same things 2,000 years later.
Yeah. You mentioned seeing the part of Jesus that rubs against other flawed humans. Not that Jesus was flawed, but that was his humanity. And as the stories will progress, it was humans that let him down. The people he sought connection with wounded him the deepest. And that's something that the whole process of The Chosen will unpack further, even in as seasons continue.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are places in the New Testament, if you're reading carefully, you realize Jesus is saying, how long must I put up with you? I
Yeah.
love you, I chose you, I have great things in store for you, but basically you drive me nuts.
Yeah. Um, let's back up just a little bit, Jerry, and about story. You have used story, and we've alluded to this all your career. You've helped important people get their biographies out there, including Billy Graham, the Left Behind series, all about story, imagining. Um, what about our human systems? Just it needs story. You've alluded to that, but let's just unpack that a little bit more and why you have made story such a key piece of your career. It's really the thing.
Yeah, and I don't want to, you know, appear, falsely modest, but I really believe I've only been mono gifted. I have one gift, and that's writing. And it started really early. My mother taught me to read before kindergarten, which made me kind of an obnoxious elementary school student. The joke in our family is that in first grade, I was reading at a fourth grade level, and in college, I was still reading at a fourth grade level. But story has always been a part of my life. In fact, I talked my way into a sports writing job before I was old enough to drive. I was 14 years old. My mother had to drive me to the ball games and back to the newspaper office. And then 10 years later, my first book was published. And this year marks 50 years from that. So I'm celebrating my 50th anniversary of being a published author. And it's all been really about story, even the nonfiction books. I find that nonfiction, I teach writing online, as you know, and I try to tell students, don't think that because you're writing nonfiction, you're not telling stories. You're telling true stories, anecdotes from someone's life or your own life. But those are the things that make it come to life. And as I mentioned, readers want to be entertained and educated, but they love to be moved too. So
Yeah.
always be reaching for the heart, and that comes from story.
Yeah. Don't you think, Jerry, that that is really how God communicates with us at the basic level? In thinking about story, I'm realizing that although we may remember like a Bible verse, God is love, okay, but what really impacts us so much of how God deals with us is through that, and it makes me think: should we be leveraging that in bigger ways as the body of Christ, in frankly spreading the gospel?
Yeah, I think that's one of the shortcomings. All of us, or at least most everybody I know, and I include myself in this, it can be very difficult and awkward to share your faith with somebody,
Yeah.
and especially if you start getting theological.
Mhm.
And when people talk about, remember that verse about this or that point of theology, they probably don't remember it. But if you say, do you know the story of David and Goliath, or you know the story of some Old Testament thing, or a miracle from the New Testament, people know this stuff. And I think the counsel for us in sharing our faith is to simply tell our story. Here's who I was, here's
Yeah.
who I am now, and here's what happened in between. And people respond to that, and I don't think they feel pressured. And the conversation goes from being awkward to just being, wow, that's interesting to learn about you. We share about each other, and we can share our faith that way.
Yeah. One of the things I like to geek out on is neurobiology, and I'm aware that story brings the factual left part of our brain and the just more emotional, nonverbal right part of our brain together in a memorable way. And God built us that way, and you have certainly, leveraged that. Is there anything about your journey over 50 plus years, your own story? What you mentioned, telling our story when we share our faith. um I'm sure we could probably spend a long time about your story, but are there any pieces that you might just want to talk about for a moment?
Yeah, a couple things. I can remember as a teenager feeling a little disappointed in my own testimony, because I would hear dramatic testimonies of people who were saved out of prostitution or drugs or alcoholism, things like that.
Yes.
And the older I get, the more I realize what a miracle it was that I
Mm.
was raised in a Christian home, and that alcohol didn't play a role in our family, and that I was in church, three times every week, and it's just as much a miracle. My mother led me to faith when I was 6 years old,
Mm.
and that is a dramatic testimony too. And I don't have to be ashamed of that, and I can say, maybe it isn't dramatic like some other people's, and I've had the privilege of writing their stories, but it is a miracle. And I found too that a lot of people assume that because of all the writing I've done, they assume I was called to write. And really, I wasn't. Even though, as I mentioned, I talked my way into this sports writing job
Yeah.
as a teenager. When I was about 16, I was at camp, and the speaker was talking about how all Christians need to be full time Christians,
Mm.
but some people actually make their living serving God, and they're called to that. They're called to full time Christian work. And I'd always been fairly devout. I wouldn't say, a model, but I really loved the Lord and wanted to serve Him. And
Yes.
I felt that call. And I remember really feeling under conviction, going forward and thinking, all right, that's the end of the sports writing. I'm going to have to study now to be a pastor or a missionary. And the speaker's wife was the counselor that night. She was really wise. And I told her my story and what I assumed would have to happen now. And she said, don't be too quick to give up the writing because God often equips us before he calls us. If
Wow.
he's equipped you with this gift, that may be the vehicle you use to follow this call. Well, so my call is not to writing. My call is to full-time Christian work. Writing just happens to be the equipment I use to fulfill that call. And it changes my whole view of success. I have lots of colleagues who judge their writing success on bestsellers and royalty checks and reviews and letters from readers. I've enjoyed all that. That's been icing on the cake, but
Yes.
I succeed when I obey. So
Mm.
when I finish writing a manuscript, the rest of it, as Dallas often says, it's up to God to multiply. The 5 loaves and 2 fish are what we bring. I didn't use that terminology when I was a kid. I just said, I succeed by obeying. This is my manuscript. I can't make people buy it. I can't make it become a bestseller. I can't make it change people's lives, but God can. So I simply, to me, success is obedience.
Mm. I love that perspective. I know I have wrestled with that at times. For the majority of my career, my day-to-day life was as a practicing physician, and I came to understand that medicine can be a ministry. I'm doing things, a bit differently now, but you're talking about we are all called, like you said, to be full-time Christians,
Yeah,
whether the paycheck comes from other Christians or a Christian institution or not. We are all in full-time ministry in that sense.
right, right.
Yeah.
Or we should be.
Yes. Yes. Um, you are a writer par excellence, and you've written over 200 books, a bunch of bestsellers. I have written a bit, but not 5% of the over 200 books that you've written. I have been blessed to learn about writing in many of the things you make available to other writers online. Um, Talk a bit, if you would, about your writing process, and then how you help other writers, but just how do you go about the writing process?
Yeah, my writing process is in some ways similar to other writers, in some ways very different. The fact that I write so much is kind of unusual, and I tend to be a fast writer. But my process is when I'm on deadline and I'm writing a book,
Yeah.
the first thing I do I'm a morning person. So what I do from dawn to noon is going to be the best writing I do. And the first thing I do is I do a heavy edit and rewrite of everything I wrote the day before. So if I wrote 5 pages or 10 pages, it used to be I could do even more than that. I don't try to do that anymore. But I do that heavy edit and rewrite, and I have my perfectionist cap on,
Yeah.
and my inner critic has full free reign. And I'm a perfectionist, so I want to be happy with every word. And then that transitions me into that day's writing, rough draft writing. So I take that perfectionist cap off, tell the inner critic to shut up, and
Hmm.
just get the story down or get the nonfiction idea down. And then every time I'm tempted as a perfectionist to fix what I'm doing while I'm doing it,
Yeah.
that slows me to a crawl. And I just remind myself, you can put your perfectionist cap on again tomorrow and have fun, editing and revising. But for now, just get it down. Now, some writers, when I teach writers online, some say, I want to write the whole manuscript and then go back. I don't recommend that because if you find something about a quarter of the way through that changes everything else, now you have to rewrite the whole thing. So
Hmm.
do it in increments. It doesn't have to be every day like I do. It could be once a week. You take what you've written that week and do it, or you set it aside for a month and do that. Whatever works. I tell writers to trust their gut, but that's my process.
Yeah. Well, that's helpful. And as I have studied some of your writing material, one of the things that has helped me is just to understand the difference between getting it down, writing it down, and then being a ruthless self editor,
Right.
learning to just ruthlessly critique yourself,
Right.
not holding on to any words or phrases or even elements of story or ideas or whatever as your darlings. Just be willing to do whatever it takes to get the message across. And I've also learned from you that story isn't just novel, that it needs to be included in nonfiction too, because that's how our brains just that's what makes it memorable.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's an important point. And even some stories in nonfiction might be made up as long as we're clear that we're doing that. If we say to the
Yes.
reader, if I say, I was talking to my brother the other day, they know that's a true story. I'm telling what he said and what happened to him. But if I say, consider a young woman who's teaching first grade,
Yeah.
just the very fact that I use the word consider, they realize this is an example. I'm not choosing somebody specific, but what if this happens? And so they're reading a sort of fictitious story, but it's buttressing my nonfiction theme or idea. And so we get to write fiction and nonfiction at the same time, and I think it really engages the reader.
That's good. That's good. Talk a bit, if you would, about how you do help writers, because you do so much. That's a big part of your heart. How do you help writers?
Yeah, I the last several years I have taught writing online. I've got about 2,000 online writing students, and a lot of people say, "Well, aren't you still writing too? Because how do you have time for this?" Well, I don't want to be that guy who teaches writing now and used to write. I want to be somebody who's in the game so I can, identify with what they're doing,
Yeah.
working with an agent, working with editors, working with publishers. But what I do is I just feel obligated because of how blessed my career has been to pay it forward. Nothing gives me more pleasure than teaching what I know and
Mhm.
saying to people, you don't have to agree with it. You don't have to take everything I say as gospel. Just, here's what I've learned over 50 years of being in the
Yes.
game. And if there's anything here that helps you, that's great. And I want it to be available to everybody. So while we have some courses that are very expensive on one end of the spectrum, I have free stuff on the other end. You get daily free writing tips, blogs, things that I write about. I have a YouTube channel that's free. People can
Yes.
just check in there on any subject they want. But if anybody's interested in writing, and what I found is that 81% of Americans believe they have a book in them. Now, they're not all correct, but they think that. And so that's my market. And I say, if I can help you get better, just
Mhm.
check me out at jerryjenkins.com and then look at the spectrum of things we offer and go for what you can afford. And if you need free stuff, we're happy to have you.
Yeah. Um, what might you say to somebody who's early in life, or even not so early in life, who just feels like they want to write? Maybe they feel like there's a message in them that feels like, oh, I could never do that. I could never be a writer. How would
Right.
you suggest that they start?
Yeah, I think it's important for them to know that even wildly successful best-selling authors feel that way every day. As I say, I've been in the business for 50 years. I can look on
Yeah.
the bookshelf beyond the camera here and see
Yeah.
all the books I've ever written.
Yeah.
And yet, every time I start a new one, I wonder, why did I think I could do this?
Thank
I
you.
hit the brick wall like everybody does. I fear I'm not good enough. I fear the competition is too great. And I've decided to embrace that fear and say, that's probably true. I'm probably
Mm,
not good enough and the competition is too great, but that's not going to paralyze me. It's going to motivate me to do the best I can because people are getting published every day. And I'm not a writer because I want to be a writer. I'm a writer because I have something to say. I have
yes.
a message burning in me. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of, all right, I want to be a writer. What should I write? My question is, if you don't know what you want to write, you probably shouldn't be a writer. Write out of the overflow of your passion. And that's what comes through. People say, how do you write a bestseller? You don't write a bestseller. You write out of that overflow and you write what you're passionate about. That's what engages readers, and that's what can become successful books.
Yeah. Wonderful. Um, Want to kind of circle back a little bit to where we started in Dallas and the Chosen and all. As a father, what has it been like to see your son do this? Where in your home in your just what's going on with your soul as you see this amazing phenomenon out
Yeah,
here
you
with the
can
Chosen?
you can imagine how Diana and I feel. In fact, sometimes we watch him on television or watch him online,
Yeah.
and we look at each other and say, "Who raised this kid? Was he raised by wolves?" I mean, it was. I will say this: if we did anything right, I established a policy before we had kids that I would not do any writing or any work from the office. I was working full time at that time. From the
Yes.
time the kids got home from the time I got home from work until the time the kids went to bed. And I followed that religiously. And so our three grown sons, Dallas is the oldest, they're all in their 40s now. They're all my best friends. With none of them rebelled. I can't guarantee that. I know people that
Right.
really are devout and try to raise their kids right, and they have prodigals. I know that's a pain.
Right.
But if we did anything right, it was showing the kids. I didn't just tell them they were my priority. I proved it with time.
Mm.
It's spell
Yes.
love, Time. And this old
Yes.
myth about if you don't have much time, give them quality time. That's from the pit.
Mm.
Kids don't know the difference. To them, quality time is quantity time, and so that's what they got. With Dallas, it's kind of interesting. For years, his identity was he was Jerry Jenkins' son, and now my identity is I'm Dallas Jenkins' father. I couldn't be prouder, and I love it that way, and I hope it's always that way. Um, it's uh, we love to tell people because we get asked every day how proud we must be of Dallas, and I say we're as proud of who he is
Yeah.
as we are of what he's done.
Yes.
And he's a man of God, and I have a personal accountability team that I report to, and he's one of the people on that team. Not too many people can say their own son is on their
Wow.
accountability team, but that shows my respect for him.
Yeah. That is something. That says a lot. And I don't know anybody else whose son would be one of those. That does say a lot.
And you can't put
Um,
anything over on your own son.
yes. Yes. They know you too well.
That's right.
Uh, uh, last, or at least moving toward the end here, you've also been married over 50 years. Do you have just any word or two about that? Because just the longevity,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who can't say that. It's been over 50 years. You and Diana are married still, I believe.
We are.
What would you say about that?
Yeah, it's been the greatest gift of my life, my wife, and I think it's been in many ways fortunate. Our personalities, how they mesh, we really are best friends. And I hear stories of other people, and they talk about how tough marriage is and how it's hard, and you really have to work at it. Well,
Yeah.
we work at making sure we spend a lot of time with each other, and we're still dating and still flirting with each other, and we're still polite to each other. We greet each other every morning with an embrace, and we kiss each other goodnight. Um, but I think the important thing is we're not ones we don't like tension. And
Mm.
so if there's a disagreement, or if there's something that one of us has irritated the other, we read that, and if we compete to see who can clear the air first. And so we keep very short accounts. It's like we don't
Yeah.
want to live this way. We don't want to live. Now I'm upset with you, and I'm not going to talk to you. Or if you don't know what's wrong, I'm not going to tell you. And that type of thing.
Mm.
That doesn't go. We say, clearly I did something. What was it? Let me know so I can fix it. And we both do that, and that has worked. And when people sit around and tell about the struggles of their marriage, we often have to say we don't want to brag, but we'd have to make something up if we're going to talk about some fight, because we've never raised our voices to each other. We don't hold grudges. We don't go to bed angry, and it works.
Yeah. Uh, Beautiful story of you, your life, I'm going to say your ministry, just the family, how that has been displayed. Thank you for your part in The Chosen. We'll have links everywhere in the show notes, or under this video, to your site for the book, etc. Uh, many blessings to you, and thank you so much for your generosity, time, and heart here today.
Well, thanks so much, Carol. You made it easy. I think you've done this before, but it was great to be with you.
You will want to check the links. We've got the link to Jerry Jenkins' website, to some of his social media, to this particular one of his books, The Chosen Novel, Volume 3. Uh, and if you don't know The Chosen, check it out. The TV series, videos, the app, there's just so much there. I would also love to hear from you. Uh, I have learned so much from people like you who write to me. As you share bits of your story with me, it enriches me and helps me, frankly, better share stories with others. You can come to the contact page over on our website, drcarolministries.com. Leave me a confidential message there. You can leave a comment under this video. I would love to hear from you. And then would you subscribe? If you are not already subscribed to our channel, would you just hit the subscribe button? Our material, we put up a new episode every week, and I think you will really enjoy that. We've got something special if you're watching this soon after it first comes out. In just a couple weeks on Christmas Day, we are beginning a very special series, The 12 Days of Christmas. Short messages. You'll want to be subscribed so you can get those. Thank you again for joining me in this episode, and until next time, may God bless you.